In 2012, a researcher at Vanguard ran the numbers on what actually separates investors who end up wealthy from those who don't. It wasn't income, it wasn't stock selection. The single biggest variable was how long they stayed in during the years when nothing seemed to be happening. Most people assume compound interest is a steady climb. Put money in, watch it grow. What they don't know is that it doesn't work like that at all. It moves in levels, and each level feels completely different from the one before it. So here's the question that actually matters. If the early years are designed to feel like they're not working, how do you know when you're about to cross into the phase where everything changes? That gap between how it feels and how it actually works. That's what this video is about. Because if you don't understand the structure, you will almost certainly exit the game at exactly the wrong moment. Not out of panic, just out of quiet, reasonable doubt. And that exit has a price tag most people never calculate. My name is Alex, and if you've ever stared at your investment account and wondered why the math doesn't feel like it's adding up, stay with this, because the early years aren't broken, they're just the first level, and I'm going to show you exactly where the inflection point is and what becomes available to you on the other side of it. Once you understand how the levels actually work, you stop measuring progress the wrong way entirely. There's a pattern to how this unfolds, and it always starts the same way, with what I call the Great Discouragement phase. You know what nobody prepares you for? The part where doing everything right still feels like doing nothing at all. That feeling has a name. It's called the Great Discouragement phase, and it's the stretch of time that quietly ends most people's investing journey before it ever gets interesting. Understanding what it actually is, and why it's built into the math, is the difference between arriving at the other end wealthy and walking away with a truck you'll forget you own. Let me walk you through how this plays out in practice. Meet two people. Marcus is a 32-year-old project manager in Columbus, Ohio. Diana is a 31-year-old physical therapist in the same city. Same income bracket, same general awareness that they should be investing, same decision to start putting $500 a month into a basic index fund. No stock picks, no complicated strategy, just an automated transfer on the first of every month, straight into a broad market fund. For the first year, their stories are identical. After 12 months, Marcus logs into his account expecting to feel something. He's contributed $6,000 of his own money. His investment growth, the actual return from the market working on his behalf, is $283. That's it, less than a decent dinner for two at a nice restaurant. His money is technically growing. It's just growing at a pace that feels almost designed to make him feel foolish for trying. And here's the thing, that feeling isn't irrational. The math in year one is genuinely underwhelming. At a 7% annual return, $500 a month takes about 6 months just to generate its first $100 in gains. There's no way to dress that up and make it exciting. You have to know what you're actually building before the early numbers make any sense. This is where most people lose the thread. Not because they panic, because they get bored, and bored feels a lot like wrong. Years 2 through 5 are the worst of it. You're still contributing. The balance is still moving. But the growth is slow enough that it barely registers against the life happening around you. A friend gets a promotion and renovates his kitchen. Someone else buys a new car. Your brokerage account crosses $15,000, and it doesn't feel like anything. You're laying a foundation, but when you're standing at ground level, a foundation just looks like a hole in the ground. By year 4, Marcus and Diana have each accumulated around $30,000. That's where their paths split. Marcus does the math in his head, looks at what he could do with that money right now, and decides the compound interest story is overhyped. He cashes out, uses it as a down payment on a truck. The truck is real. The future account balance wasn't. And in that moment, the choice is obvious. Diana feels the same pull. I want to be clear about that. She's not some financially enlightened superhero. She's just as tired of watching slow numbers as Marcus is. But she stays in, not with conviction exactly, more with stubbornness. She decides she's going to give it more time before deciding it isn't working. That one difference, Marcus cashing out, Diana staying in, will eventually be worth more than $3 million. Not because Marcus made a stupid decision by normal standards, because the math of compounding is brutally unforgiving when you leave early. Dalbar, one of the oldest independent financial research firms in the country, has been tracking this exact behavior for over 30 years. Their 2025 report found that over the 20 years ending December 2024, the average American equity investor earned 9.24% per year. compared to 10.35% from the S&P 500 index. That sounds like a small gap. It isn't. On a 30-year investment horizon, that difference compounds into a dramatically smaller retirement account. And the cause, according to Dalbar, isn't bad stock picks or bad funds. It's behavioral. It's people doing exactly what Marcus did, exiting when the early returns felt too slow to matter. In 2024 alone, the S&P 500 returned 25%. The average investor captured 16.5%. The largest withdrawals from equity funds happened in the quarters right before the biggest gains. People left just before the rules changed. That pattern has repeated itself, with slight variations, for decades. Now, Diana isn't special because she has better willpower. She's ahead because she understood, or at least trusted, that the early years are structurally designed to feel unremarkable. The mechanism isn't broken in year 3, it's just loading. And once it starts to wake up, the numbers shift in a way that is genuinely difficult to believe until you see it happen in your own account. That shift, what I'd call the awakening phase, is where everything Marcus gave up actually starts to arrive. Here's something the early years of investing don't prepare you for: the moment the math stops being slow. Diana doesn't notice it at first. Year 10 arrives the same way the others did: another 12 months of automatic transfers, another year of watching the balance inch forward. But this time, something is different. She logs in, and the number staring back at her is $104,000. She's contributed $60,000 of her own money over the decade. The market has added $44,000 on top of that. And for the first time, the gains are no longer trivial. This is the awakening phase, not a single event. More like a dial quietly turning up. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime partner and one of the most rigorous financial thinkers of the last century, talked about this threshold more than almost anything else. His exact words at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting: "The first 100,000 is a bitch, but you gotta do it. After that, you can ease off the gas a little bit." He wasn't being motivational. He was describing a mathematical reality. Before $100,000, almost all of your growth comes from you: your contributions, your discipline, your decision to keep going. After it, the account starts pulling its own weight. And here's what that looks like in actual numbers. At 7% annual growth, which is the inflation-adjusted long-run average the S&P 500 has delivered across nearly a century of data, $100,000 generates $7,000 per year in returns, without you adding a single dollar. That's not a bonus. That's a full month of after-tax income for a lot of people, produced entirely by capital that's already sitting there. It's the first moment in the journey where the machine starts to matter as much as the mechanic. Now think about how long it took Diana to get there. 10 years, $60,000 in contributions of her own money, and a decade of patience through the Great Discouragement phase. That's what it costs to reach this level. The second 100,000, 5 years. Not 10. 5. The third, about 3. This is the part that never feels real until you watch it happen. The math stops being linear. Each new 100,000 arrives faster than the one before it, because the base that's already working gets larger with every passing year. Diana isn't contributing more. She isn't making riskier bets. The only variable that changed is time. The account now has enough mass that its own returns are doing serious work. By year 15, Diana's balance sits at $212,000. She's put in $90,000 of her own money over 15 years. Her investment growth, the amount the market has added without any help from her paycheck, is $122,000. Let that sit for a second. Her account has now made her more money than she has. Every dollar she ever contributed has been out-earned by the returns those dollars generated. Her money is a better employee than she is, and it doesn't sleep, doesn't take vacation, and doesn't ask for a raise. This is the moment most people never see, because most people are Marcus. Marcus, if you remember, cashed out in year 4. He's not broke. He's fine, actually. He has a truck he likes, a house with a modest down payment, and a savings account he adds to occasionally. But the compounding machine he switched off, that machine, had he left it running, would now be at $212,000 and accelerating. Instead, he's starting over, if he starts over at all. I want to be honest about something here. The numbers in this phase can feel abstract until you translate them into time. $212,000, growing at 7% annually, generates about $14,800 per year in returns. That's roughly $1,200 a month. produced automatically. That's a car payment, a modest mortgage contribution, or 3 months of groceries every single year, created by nothing but the compounding of a habit Diana started 15 years ago at $500 a month. The reason most people never experience this is not that they can't get here. It's that they overestimate how much the early years should feel like progress and underestimate how much the later years actually deliver. The first decade tests your patience. The second decade rewards it at a scale that genuinely surprises people. And Diana isn't done, not even close. Because what happens after year 15 is where the story stops being about personal finance and starts being about something else entirely. The snowball has been rolling long enough that it's about to reach a size where the rules of the game, who gets access to what, who gets to invest in what, quietly shift underneath her. The end game isn't just a bigger number, it's a different system. And that system has a door most people never even knew existed. Most people think the finish line is retirement. It isn't. The finish line is a different game entirely. By year 30, Diana's account crosses $1 million. She's 61 years old. She never changed her strategy, never moved into complicated products, never hired a fancy advisor to restructure her portfolio. She kept her $500 a month going into the same broad index fund she opened in her early 30s, and the math did everything else. $1,062,000 to be exact. Meanwhile, Marcus, the project manager who cashed out in year 4, is 60 years old, has roughly $48,000 saved, and is mapping out a retirement plan that probably starts at 72, if he's fortunate. The truck he bought is long gone. That one decision, that single moment of impatience in year 4, cost Marcus more than $1 million. Not in some theoretical sense. In actual, calculable, compounded dollars that would have been sitting in an account with his name on it. But here's where the story takes a turn most people don't see coming. Because crossing $1 million doesn't just change the number on the screen. It changes the legal category Diana belongs to. Under current SEC rules, an individual with a net worth exceeding $1 million, excluding the value of their primary home, qualifies as what's called an accredited investor. The thresholds haven't changed since 1982, which means they were never adjusted for inflation, which means the pool of people who technically qualify has grown substantially over the decades. But the concept behind the designation is still the same. Once you reach this level of capital, the government considers you capable of evaluating investments that are too complex or too risky for the general public to access. It's not a badge, it's a door. And most people don't know the door exists. On one side of that door is the world Diana has been in for 30 years. Public markets, index funds, exchange-traded funds, the same instruments available to anyone with a brokerage account, and 12 minutes to set up an automatic transfer. That world is accessible, transparent, and genuinely powerful over time, as Diana's 30-year journey proves, beyond any doubt. But it is also the only market most people will ever see. On the other side of that door is something different: private equity, private credit, real assets, venture capital funds. Deals that never appear on any exchange because they don't have to. According to research from Cambridge Associates, U.S. private equity funds delivered an average annual return of 13.1% over the 25 years ending in 2023, compared to 8.6% for the S&P 500 over the same period. That gap is not guaranteed. Private equity has its down cycles, and recent years have been complicated. But the long-run structural advantage comes from one simple fact. Private markets don't trade daily. There is no ticker, no panicked selling at 2 in the morning. The capital goes in, the companies are managed, and the investors wait. The patience that Diana practiced in her public index fund is basically built into the structure of private investing. You don't get a choice. Nearly 90% of companies in the United States with revenues above $100 million are private. The economy most people think they're investing in through their index funds is actually a fraction of the real economy. The rest of it, the private part, is where accredited investors get to operate. Now, I want to be honest about something here, because this isn't a sales pitch for private markets. They carry real risks. The investments are illiquid. Your capital can be locked up for 7 to 10 years. There is no easy exit. The best returns are concentrated in a small number of top-tier funds, and access to those funds is not straightforward, even with accredited status. The designation doesn't hand you a golden ticket. It hands you a key, and then you still have to find the right doors. But the point isn't that private markets are automatically better. The point is that Diana now has options that Marcus never will. She can evaluate opportunities that simply don't exist in the public realm. She can sit across from a fund manager running a private credit strategy that has delivered consistent double-digit returns for a decade and actually participate in it. She can be the capital behind deals that most people read about in the business section and never think of as something they could be part of. And from private equity, there is a next level. Family offices, hedge funds, bespoke investment structures built entirely around the goals and tax situation of a single family or individual. At this tier, the investment isn't just placed, it's designed. Strategy, structure, tax optimization, and generational planning are woven together into something that functions more like an institution than a portfolio. That progression, from index fund to accredited investor to institutional level capital, is not a straight line. It's a series of thresholds, each one unlocking a fundamentally different relationship with money. And crossing each threshold requires the thing Diana has had all along. The willingness to stay in when leaving felt completely rational. But there is a final level above all of this, one where the whole framework stops being about investment strategy at all and starts being about something that operates more like structural power. That's where compound interest stops being a personal finance concept and becomes something else entirely. At some point, the money stops being about you. That's when things get genuinely strange. Diana's portfolio crossed $3 million around year 40. She's in her early 70s. She never managed a hedge fund, never sold a company, never did anything other than transfer $500 a month into the same index fund she opened when she was 31 years old. The machine she switched on 4 decades ago has been running quietly the whole time, and now it's producing something that no longer fits neatly inside the category of personal finance. Here's what $3 million at 7% annually actually generates: $210,000 per year in returns, without her selling a single share, without her touching the principal, without her doing anything at all. That is not a retirement account. That is a self-sustaining financial organism that now grows faster than most American households earn. And this is where compound interest stops being a savings strategy and starts being something structural. Let me explain what I mean by that, because it sounds abstract until you look at the mechanics. Below a certain level of wealth, your relationship with money is fundamentally transactional. You earn it, you spend it, you save some of it, and you try to grow what you've saved. Every major financial decision, buying a house, funding a retirement, handling an emergency, is a negotiation between what you have and what you need. Most people live their entire financial lives inside that negotiation. Above a certain level, the negotiation disappears. At $3 million, Diana's returns cover her living expenses and then keep growing. She doesn't need to draw down the principal, ever. She could spend $150,000 a year, leave $60,000 to compound, and her account would be larger next year than it is today. The machine is no longer serving her retirement. It's outliving her retirement, which means at some point it stops being hers alone and starts being something she decides what to do with. That decision is where generational wealth actually begins, not in some abstract, aspirational sense, in a specific, legal, structural sense. Take the stepped-up basis rule. Under current U.S. law, when an asset is inherited at death, its tax basis resets to the market value at the time of inheritance. What that means in plain language, if Diana has held an index fund for 40 years and it has grown from $60,000 of contributions to $3 million in value, none of that gain, none of those $2.9 million of growth, is subject to capital gains tax when her heirs inherit it. The gains that accumulated over 4 decades are simply forgiven at the moment of transfer. According to the Joint Committee on Taxation, this provision alone will cost the federal government $72.5 billion in foregone revenue in 2026. That's not a loophole someone discovered. That's a feature of the tax code that is only meaningful at a scale most people never reach. At the level Diana is now operating, wealth doesn't just compound financially, it compounds structurally. Every year her account grows, the tax-advantaged transfer that will eventually happen grows with it. She is quietly building something that her children and grandchildren will inherit, with the clock reset to 0. And there's more. At this level of capital, borrowing replaces selling as the primary financial tool. Wealthy families borrow against their portfolios rather than liquidating them. A $3 million portfolio serves as collateral for a loan at favorable interest rates. The loan proceeds are spent. The portfolio keeps compounding. No taxable event, no capital gains triggered. The assets continue growing while the borrowing funds current life. It's not a trick. It's a structural advantage that is entirely inaccessible to anyone operating below this threshold. Now, I want to be honest about something, because this can start to sound like a complaint about the system, and that's not quite what this is. These structures exist by design. They were created to encourage long-term investment, to reduce the tax friction on capital formation, and to keep money working in productive assets rather than cycling through the tax system. Whether they're fair is a separate conversation. Whether they work is not in question. And whether they're available to Diana is the entire point of everything she did for 40 years. Above $50 million, the general threshold where a dedicated family office starts to become operationally viable, the framework shifts again. Now, you're not just managing a portfolio. You're running a private institution. Investment teams, tax strategists, estate attorneys, and philanthropic advisors work together inside a single structure designed specifically for one family. The median assets under management in a U.S. family office today are $476 million. That is not a number most people can internalize, but the architecture that produces it starts with the same $500 monthly transfer Diana made in her early 30s. At this level, the goal stops being wealth accumulation entirely. You can't spend it all. You can't lose it to ordinary risk. The question shifts from, how do I grow this, to what does this machine build beyond me? It becomes about institutions, foundations, trusts, and descendants who haven't been born yet. It becomes about designing a system that operates independently of any single person's decisions or lifespan. That is the final level of compound interest, not a number on a screen, a machine that runs without you. And the whole remarkable thing, the thing that ties every level of this story together, is that it all starts at the same place, with the same decision and the same patient, unglamorous, maddening early years that almost everyone mistakes for failure. That realization and what it means for where you are right now is exactly what we're going to land on next. Here's the realization the whole journey points to. The reason the early years feel broken is that they are the most mechanical part of the process. Nothing is wrong. The machine is just loading. Compound interest works in levels. The first decade tests your willingness to stay when leaving makes complete sense. The second decade rewards that patience at a scale that surprises people. The third decade shifts the rules of the game entirely. And beyond that, the question stops being about money and starts being about what you build with a system that now runs on its own. The practical thing to watch for is this. Notice when you feel the urge to exit. That feeling is the data. It almost always arrives right before a threshold, not right after one. The people who crossed every level in this story did not have better information than the people who left. They just waited one more year than their doubt told them to. One question worth sitting with. If compound interest eventually stops being personal finance and becomes structural power, what does that imply about the things we're told to spend money on right now? And who benefits when we do? That thread leads somewhere interesting.